try to keep something between you and your target.
We try to make as much money off of everything that we kill.
Tom Oar, the last living symbol of America's forgotten frontier, the man who turned Montana's frozen wilderness into a cathedral of survival, and mountain men into a timeless monument of human endurance. From a trembling boy dropped at the edge of town with nothing but a bull rope and a prayer, he rose to become the most beloved voice of self-reliance in television history. With calloused hands that could tan a hide using methods extinct for centuries, and a heart forged in rodeo dust and mountain ice, he built an empire not of wealth, but of unwavering authenticity. For over 5 decades, Tom Oar has not simply lived off the grid. He has redefined what it means to choose hardship over comfort, silence over noise, and truth over everything the modern world promised him. Tom Oar, the iron soul behind 13 seasons of Mountain Men, the craftsman whose buckskin bore witness to a dying art, the husband who built a log cabin with his bare hands and called it forever. But behind that legend lies a story not glamorous but devastating. A battlefield of near death beneath a bull's hooves, a daughter stolen at 49, a heart that gasps for breath in the night, and tragedies that even the wildest mountains could never protect him from. The world has admired his strength for years, but few are prepared to face the haunting truth he now carries. Wrestling with shadows so heavy that even his fortress of solitude cannot silence them. Before we begin, if those mountains ever gave you courage, tears, or faith, leave a like as a tribute to a man who sacrificed comfort to prove that legends are not born from ease but from endurance. It's heartbreaking when the beginning of a legend is marked not by applause but by the sound of a door closing and a childhood that never felt like home. Born in March 1943 in Rockford, Illinois, Tom Oar entered a world still raw from war, where his father, Charles Joseph Chike Oar, returned from the Navy with scars no one could see and a restlessness that never settled. Chike had survived the Pacific, but peace did not come home with him. Instead, he found solace in horses, in danger, in the Wild West shows that toured the Midwest like ghosts of another century. By the time Tom could walk, his father had already decided the boy's fate. At 7 years old, the same age most children learn to ride bicycles, Tom was taught to perform stunts on the back of a running horse. Not gently, not gradually, but with the unforgiving precision of a man who believed survival was the only lesson worth teaching. His mother, Mary Jane, a pianist whose fingers could make hymns weep, watched from kitchen windows as her sons tumbled and rose, their small bodies learning that pain was simply the cost of being alive. She never stopped them. She understood that Chike was not teaching tricks. He was teaching them how to fall without breaking. The house smelled of horse leather and oil, of coffee stretched too thin and bread baked from flour that barely lasted the week. Tom's older brother Jack learned beside him, 2 boys spinning through air while their father barked corrections from below. There were no safety nets, no soft landings, just dirt, dust, and the knowledge that hesitation was more dangerous than the fall itself. By the time Tom turned 15, he had already lived more lifetimes than most men twice his age. The trick riding had carved discipline into his bones, but it also carved loneliness. School felt like a foreign language. Classmates laughed at normal things. Tom only understood adrenaline and survival. So, when his mother drove him to the edge of Rockford one cold morning in 1958, handed him his bull rope and rigging bag, and told him to hitchhike to Ohio for rodeo work, he didn't cry. He didn't ask why. He simply walked. His mother's taillights disappeared into the gray dawn. Tom stood there, 15 years old, holding everything he owned in a canvas sack, watching cars pass without stopping. Hours blurred together. His stomach twisted with hunger. His hands grew numb. But when a truck finally pulled over and the driver asked where he was headed, Tom looked him straight in the eye and said, "Wherever the bulls are." That night, sleeping in a barn he didn't own, listening to horses breathe in stalls nearby, Tom whispered to the darkness a promise his father had never made but had always implied. That comfort was a trap. That safety was an illusion. That the only life worth living was one where you earned your right to breathe every single day. Those years, the ones where other boys learned algebra and asked girls to dances, Tom learned how bones sounded when they cracked, how blood tasted when a hoof caught your lip, how loneliness felt when you were surrounded by crowds that only saw you when you were flying through air or crumpled in dirt. He learned early that the world did not reward gentleness. It rewarded grit. And grit was the only currency he had ever been given. The boy who once performed tricks for his father's approval was slowly becoming the man who would one day teach the world that survival is not a performance. It is a prayer whispered in the dark, hoping tomorrow gives you one more chance to prove you're still standing. It's heartbreaking how hunger sharpens some men into blades while it breaks others into dust. For Tom Oar, the rodeo circuit of the 1960s was not a career. It was a crucible. By his early 20s, he had already ridden more bulls and broncs than most cowboys faced in a lifetime. His body was a map of violence. Ribs that had cracked and healed crooked, shoulders that clicked when he raised his arms, scars across his back from being dragged through chutes. But every bruise, every break, every night spent coughing blood into motel sinks only made him hungrier. He joined the International Rodeo Association, and within years, his name began appearing in the top 10. Not because he was lucky, but because he was relentless. While other riders celebrated in bars, Tom studied the animals, watched how their muscles coiled before they exploded, learned to read rage in the flick of an ear, death in the turn of a hoof. He wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the fastest, but he was the one who refused to quit even when quitting was mercy. For 18 years, he rode bulls. For 25, he conquered bucking horses. The arena became his cathedral. The roar of the crowd, his only gospel. And for a while, it felt like enough. Nancy came into his life during those years, a woman from northern Illinois who understood that loving a rodeo man meant loving his absence more than his presence. She never asked him to quit. She simply stayed. Through the long months when he traveled from town to town, when his paychecks barely covered gas, when he came home smelling of dirt and disappointment, she stayed because she saw something in him that even he didn't see yet. That beneath the adrenaline and the danger was a man searching not for glory, but for proof that he belonged somewhere. They married young, built a life on the margins, and dreamed quietly of a place where the noise would finally stop. By the early 1970s, Tom had climbed as high as a man could climb in the IRA. He made the finals again and again. His name was spoken with respect in arenas across the Midwest. For the boy who had once hitchhiked to Ohio with nothing, this should have felt like victory. But victory in the rodeo is always temporary. And fate, cruel and patient, was already tightening the rope. It was Valentine's Day, 1970. The kind of cold February afternoon where breath hangs in the air and every sound feels sharper than it should. Tom was 35 years old at the peak of his powers, standing in the chute beside a massive bull named Woolly Bugger. He had ridden hundreds of bulls before this one. He would drop his finger into the bull rope, a technique that locked his hand tight, and then 8 seconds of chaos would decide whether he walked out or was carried out. The crowd buzzed. Nancy sat in the stands, hands folded in her lap, watching the man she loved prepare to dance with death one more time. The gate opened, and in the single breath between stillness and explosion, everything shattered. Tom's head collided with the bull's skull. The impact was immediate, merciless. His world went black, but his hand, locked in the rope, kept him bound to the animal's back. Unconscious, helpless, his body became a rag doll beneath 2,000 pounds of rage. Woolly Bugger bucked, twisted, stomped. Tom's legs dragged beneath the bull's hind hooves. His ribs absorbed blows meant to kill. For 2 agonizing minutes, the arena held its breath. Nancy screamed from the stands, but her voice was swallowed by the roar. Cowboys rushed in, trying to cut the rope, but the bull thrashed harder, sensing the kill. When they finally freed him, Tom lay motionless in the dirt. His face was unrecognizable. His body, a broken map of bruises. They carried him out on a stretcher. For 3 hours, he did not wake. When consciousness finally returned, the first thing he felt was not pain, but emptiness. The concussion had stolen something from him. Not memory, not strength. But the invisible thread that once connected him to the animal, the instinct that kept him alive. A month later, against every doctor's warning, he climbed back into the chute. But the magic was gone. He could still ride, but he could no longer win. For 6 more years, he tried. He chased the feeling that had once defined him. But every time he looked into a bull's eyes, he saw a woolly bugger. And every time he dropped his finger in the rope, his body remembered what his mind tried to forget. In 1981, at 41 years old, Tom Oar rode his last saddle bronc. He didn't cry, he didn't rage. He simply walked out of the arena, hung up his rope, and whispered to Nancy, "It's time." What followed was not defeat. It was rebirth. They loaded their belongings into a pickup truck, bought with money from selling muskrat pelts. They pointed the truck north toward Montana, toward a valley Nancy had heard about from friends, a place so remote that winter lasted 8 months, and the nearest grocery store was 50 miles away. Most people would call that exile. Tom called it freedom. They arrived in the Yaak River Valley with a chainsaw, a dream, and nothing else. They bought an 1.5 acres with a tiny 2-room log cabin and lived in that cramped space while they built their real home by hand. For 5 years, they cut trees, stripped bark, notched logs, and raised walls. Nancy worked beside him every day, her hands blistering, her back aching, but her resolve unbroken. When the cabin was finally finished, Tom stood in the doorway and looked out at the wilderness that would become his kingdom. He had survived Woolly Bugger. He had survived the death of his rodeo dreams. Now he would learn to survive something even harder. A life where comfort was not given, but earned one brutal day at a time. It's heartbreaking how peace is never free. It must be purchased with sweat, blood, and the kind of loneliness that carves itself into your bones. For Tom and Nancy, the first year in the Yaak was not romantic, it was war. Winter arrived early and stayed late. Temperatures plunged to 35 below zero, sometimes 60 below when the wind howled through the valley like a living thing. Their cabin, built by hand, was their only shelter. No electricity, no running water, no phone lines connecting them to a world that felt farther away with every snowfall. They heated with wood they cut themselves. They bathed in water hauled from a stream that froze solid for months. They ate what they could hunt, trap, or preserve. And when supplies ran low, they made the 50-mile journey to town, driving through snow so deep it swallowed the road. Tom had left the rodeo behind, but he carried its lessons into the mountains. Pain was temporary. Discipline was forever. And survival was not a skill you learned once, but a war you fought every single day. He began trapping, teaching himself from books and trial and error. He studied the old ways, the techniques used by mountain men in the 1800s, legends like Joe Meek and Jim Bridger. Men who lived and died by their ability to read the land, respect the animals, and endure the silence. One day, in a bookstore in Billings, Tom found a $3 book on brain tanning, a Native American method of tanning hides using the animal's own brain. It was brutal, exhausting work that most modern tanners had abandoned. But Tom saw in it something rare, a dying art that deserved to be preserved. He began practicing. His first attempts were disasters, hides ruined, hours wasted. But he kept going. Slowly, painfully, he mastered the craft. His buckskin became legendary. Soft as silk, durable as steel, each piece a testament to patience and precision. He began selling his work at Black Powder Rendezvous, gatherings where history lived again for a weekend. People came dressed in 1800s clothing, reenacting the fur trade era. Tom's buckskin shirts, moccasins, and jackets sold for $3,000 to $4,000 per event. It wasn't wealth, but it was enough. Nancy worked beside him, managing the trap lines, preparing meals, keeping the home fires burning when Tom disappeared into the wilderness for days at a time. She never complained. She had chosen this life knowing exactly what it would cost, and together they built something most people only dream of. A life entirely their own. But even in paradise, shadows linger. Tom's body, already scarred by the rodeo, began to show the cost of mountain living. His shoulders ached from splitting wood. His knees screamed from climbing icy slopes. His hands, once steady, trembled on the coldest mornings. And yet he kept going, because stopping meant surrendering. And surrender was not a word Tom Oar understood. He had survived Woolly Bugger. He had survived poverty. He had survived the death of his rodeo dreams. Now he was surviving the one thing most men cannot: the slow, relentless march of time. In 2012, when Tom was 69 years old, a producer from the History Channel knocked on his cabin door. They wanted to make a show about people who lived off the grid. They wanted to film Tom. At first, he refused. Fame had never interested him. The wilderness was his sanctuary, not a stage. But Nancy convinced him. "Let them see what this life really is," she said. "Let them see that it's possible." So Tom agreed. And when Mountain Men premiered in May 2012, the world met a man unlike anyone they had ever seen. Not a performer, not an actor, but a living relic of a time most people believed was extinct. Tom didn't play a mountain man. He was one. Week after week, millions watched as he battled wolves, trapped beavers, tanned hides, and survived winters that would kill most men in days. His bushy white beard, his weathered hands, his slow, deliberate way of speaking, all of it felt like a transmission from another century. He became the heart of the show, the one cast member viewers trusted completely. Because Tom never lied. He never exaggerated. He simply showed the truth. And the truth was brutal, beautiful, and heartbreaking in equal measure. For 13 seasons, he carried mountain men on his shoulders. He became a mentor to younger cast members, a symbol of authenticity in a world drowning in fakeness. His craftsmanship inspired a resurgence in traditional skills. Workshops on brain tanning saw attendance spike. Young people who had never touched a hide began seeking out the old ways. Tom didn't just entertain. He educated. He preserved. But fame came with a price. Fans began showing up at his property, asking for photos, wanting autographs. The sanctuary he had built was slowly being invaded by the very world he had escaped. He remained gracious, but the exhaustion showed in his eyes. "I appreciate the fans," he would say, "but this was never about being seen. It was about being free." And yet he continued. Season after season, winter after brutal winter. Because the show had given him something unexpected. A purpose beyond survival. A chance to prove that the old ways still mattered. That discipline, resilience, and authenticity could still inspire a world addicted to shortcuts. But even legends are not spared by fate. Behind the cameras, behind the carefully edited episodes, Tom carried wounds no show could ever film. In 2015, while the world celebrated another season of Mountain Men, Tom received the call every father dreads. His daughter Keelie, 49 years old, vibrant and full of life, had passed away. The details were kept private. The family grieved in silence, but for Tom, the loss was catastrophic. Keelie had been born from his first marriage to Janice Fraser, years before Nancy, back when Tom was still riding rodeos and dreaming of something more. She had grown up watching her father chase bulls and broncs, had seen him broken and rebuilt, and had always believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. She had appeared on Mountain Men, standing beside her father in the wilderness she understood was his church. When she died, Tom did not break down on camera. He did not make a statement. He simply disappeared into the mountains for days, alone with his grief and the ghosts that followed him. Nancy stayed close, but she knew this was a pain only time and silence could touch. Years later, Tom would admit to a close friend, "Losing Keelie took something from me I'll never get back. You bury your parents, and that's the order of things. But burying your child? That's not supposed to happen." He carried that weight quietly. It showed in the pauses between his words, in the way his eyes drifted when he thought no one was watching. And though he continued to film, something had shifted. The wilderness was no longer just his sanctuary, it had become his confessional. It's heartbreaking when your own body becomes the enemy. In 2022, during the filming of season 11, Tom woke in the middle of the night gasping for breath. Nancy, sleeping beside him, heard the sound and knew immediately something was wrong. His chest heaved, his hands clawed at the air. He couldn't catch his breath no matter how hard he tried. She didn't hesitate. She bundled him into the truck and drove through the darkness to the nearest hospital in Libby, Montana, 50 miles of winding mountain roads with her husband struggling to breathe beside her. The doctors ran tests. The diagnosis came back cold and clinical. Tom's heart was failing, not dramatically, not suddenly, but slowly, quietly, betraying him after 79 years of unrelenting labor. Fluid had settled in his lungs. His heart was no longer pumping at full capacity. They put him on medication, gave him instructions, and sent him home. But the message was clear. The body that had survived woolly bugger, that had built a life in the wilderness, that had endured 5 decades of brutal winters, was finally breaking down. Tom returned to the cabin, weaker but unbroken. He modified his routines, moved slower, rested more. But he refused to stop. The trapline still needed checking. The hides still needed tanning. The show still needed filming. Nancy watched him with the quiet fear of a woman who knew that stubbornness could only carry a man so far. "You can't keep doing this forever," she told him one night. "I know," he whispered, "but I can do it today." That phrase became his mantra. Not forever, just today. And every morning, when his body screamed in protest, when his heart labored in his chest like an engine running on fumes, he whispered it again. Just today. Then came August 2025. The History Channel released a press statement that shook the entire fanbase. Tom Oar, at 81 years old, would film his final season of Mountain Men. After 13 years after becoming the last original cast member, after carrying the show through its highest and lowest moments, Tom was stepping away. The announcement was framed as a choice, a decision. But those who knew him understood the truth. His body had made the choice for him. Age, that merciless thief, had finally stolen what the wilderness never could. His strength. Season 14 premiered on September 3rd, 2025. And for the first time in over a decade, viewers watched knowing it was the beginning of the end. Tom moved slower. His hands trembled more. But his spirit remained unbroken. In one episode, he collaborated with his brother Jack to craft a traditional peace pipe, honoring Native American traditions with the same reverence he had brought to every craft. In another, he and his longtime friend raised a Cheyenne-style teepee, cutting lodge poles and laughing like boys despite the ache in their bones. The cameras captured what words never could. A man saying goodbye to the life that had defined him. In the final episodes, Tom stood on the porch of the cabin he had built with his own hands, looking out at the mountains that had sheltered him for 50 years. "It's hard to quit anything you really like to do," he said quietly. And in that moment, the world saw not a mountain man, but a man. Tired, scarred, heartbroken, but still standing. The final scene of his final episode showed Tom walking into the wilderness at dawn, his silhouette disappearing into the trees. The screen faded to black, and millions of viewers sat in silence, realizing they had just witnessed the end of an era. Now, at 82 years old, Tom Oar still lives in the Yaak River Valley with Nancy by his side. The cabin they built together still stands, weathered but strong, a monument to their 50 years of partnership. His hands, gnarled and scarred, still tan hides using methods most people believe are extinct. His heart, damaged but determined, still beats. Slowly, carefully, but it beats. He no longer appears on television. The cameras are gone. The fame has faded. What remains is the life he always wanted. Quiet, simple, his. On cold mornings, he wakes before dawn and makes coffee while Nancy still sleeps. He stands on the porch watching the sun rise over the mountains, and he thinks about the boy who was dropped at the edge of town with a bull rope and a prayer. He thinks about Woolly Bugger and the 2 minutes that should have killed him but didn't. He thinks about Keelie and the daughter he will never stop missing. He thinks about every winter he survived, every hide he tanned, every moment he chose hardship over ease. And he smiles. Not because the journey was easy, but because he walked it on his own terms. His legacy is not measured in awards or wealth. His net worth hovers around $300,000. Modest. Earned through craft, not fame. But his true wealth is measured differently. In the log cabin that still shelters him, in the woman who never left his side, in the skills he preserved, in the millions of people he inspired to believe that authenticity still matters. Tom Oar's life is not a fairy tale. It is a testament, proof that legends are not born from privilege but from pain, that greatness is not loud but quiet, that the truest wealth is not what you accumulate but what you endure. He has lost his daughter. He has lost his health. He has lost the show that made him famous, but he has not lost himself. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all. The world will remember him as the mountain man from television, but those who truly knew him will remember something deeper. A man who chose difficulty, who honored the old ways, who built a life with his bare hands and called it enough. Tom Oar did not conquer the wilderness. He became part of it. And when the final chapter closes, when the last breath is drawn and the mountains reclaim what was always theirs, his story will remain. Not as a tragedy, but as proof that even in a world obsessed with comfort, there are still those who choose to live on their own terms. And sometimes, the hardest life is the one most worth living. So if Tom Oar has ever inspired you, if his strength, his grit, or his unshakable faith in the old ways has ever moved your heart, hit the like button as a tribute to a man who turned hardship into legend. Share your reflections below about which part of his journey spoke to you most. And wherever life finds you tonight, may you be blessed with the courage to choose authenticity over ease and the strength to rise one more time when the world tells you to quit.